Dr. Digles, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
We have a lot to cover today, so let's start off with the fundamental basics. What is decompression therapy?
Oh, that's a lot.
Yes.
It's a combination of computer technology, discoveries on how tissues respond to different forces,
All right.
biomechanical and mechanical engineering, all combined into an amazing treatment for the spine. What that combination allows a person to do is to be able to separate the vertebrae within the spine, and what that allows it to happen is disc material that's been herniated or bulged or ruptured to be put back in its proper place.
Okay.
It actually creates a negative pressure in that area, and what that causes is stimulation of healing effect.
Great.
And not only the disc tissues, but also the tissues that are around that area.
Okay.
And when that heals, pain goes away, and then you combine that with nutritional therapies and physical therapy modalities, you can strengthen those tissues so the problem doesn't come back again.
Okay. What do you think causes most types of back pain in people?
Well, it starts out usually as an event trauma or a process trauma. Event trauma like a fall or a spill.
Okay.
You injure the spine, you injure some of the tissues. Pain usually goes away.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're better.
No,
right.
Exactly. You have misalignment. That causes disc pressure, and then because in our culture we sit a lot.
Yes.
And that's not going away anytime soon.
Right.
You sit more and more, and that's one of the highest pressure causing positions you can have on the spine.
Okay.
We call it interdiscal pressure, the pressure that's on the disc space or in between the disc space.
Okay.
And that causes these fibers to be under stress, not allowing nutrients to get to those fibers. Those fibers then tend to break down.
Okay.
Disc material tends to deform. Sometimes it bulges out onto the nerve, causes a problem, like a pain down the leg or a pain down the arm. When the disc deforms, these little joints back here, they're called facet joints, they won't ride the way they're supposed to because the disc isn't holding them in a normal position, and they'll jam themselves.
Okay.
Over a longer period of time, the body will respond by putting extra calcium down in those areas, and you'll have what's called bone spurs or osteophytes that are coming off those areas. And at the end stage, you'll have a thing called stenosis, where those bone spurs or osteophytes actually grow so much that they're actually pinching bone on nerve where the nerve exits the spinal canal, or the actual spinal cord canal is being compromised with that bone. So it's a process. It's like a cavity. It started out with an event trauma. I also mentioned process trauma. Well, doing something wrong, but just very little over a long period of time. And that process then creates that same situation in the body.
Okay. Can you explain to our viewers what is a herniated disc?
A herniated disc. First off, let's talk about what a disc is.
Okay.
A disc is a complex arrangement of bands of fibers in what's called the annulus, and then a nucleus. And this nucleus is kind of a liquid material, a gelatinous material. And these fibers are pliable, they're very strong, and they're very resilient. Okay. When you have that damage to the spine and you start the process of degeneration, what will happen is these fibers will become less resilient because they're not receiving the nutrients that they should, and they're not getting rid of toxins like they should as well. Okay. So the fibers actually become less resilient. They tend more to flow instead of bounce back from insult or injury. And they'll flow so much so that they'll flow out into the space where the nerve exits the spinal canal. And that puts pressure on the nerve. Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
The gelatinous material will actually break into some of that degrading fibrous material, and then it'll flow that out to the nerve root, and then that will cause the pain either down the arm or the legs, depending on what nerve root is affected. So.
Okay, so if that's a herniated disc, then can you explain to our viewers what is disc degeneration then?
It's just describing that whole process of these fibers breaking down with time, not receiving the right nutrients, and the resiliency leaving them and becoming brittle or susceptible to fissures and cracking, things like that.
Dr. Digles, can you explain then what is disc degeneration?
Yeah, let me try to make it clear. This is a disc material, and we have the fibers, the annulus fibers and the nucleus. These fibers here they're made up of water mostly, but a molecule is called glucosaminoglycans, and that's a fancy term, but if you ever had a child that had a wet diaper, you know how that diaper swells up? If you ever take a dry diaper and kind of rip it open, and you'll see little kind of gelatinous flakes.
Okay.
And if you add water to that, what that does is that grabs those water molecules, in a sense, and then those things enlarge. Right? Your disc is like that. The glucosaminoglycans grab water molecules and enlarge the tissue. Disc degeneration, what happens is you'll have misalignment in the spine or injury to the disc material, and it's not getting those water molecules like it should because there's so much pressure on the disc, it's pushing outward instead of having water drawn back into it. It's an interesting phenomenon. When you lay down at nighttime and sleep for 8 hours or 7, 8 hours or whatever, those glucosaminoglycans will gather water to them, and you'll be taller in the morning than you are at the end of the day.
Great.
Now with disc degeneration, you're always having pressure outward, so these fibers, again, not getting the nutrients they should have, so they start breaking down. And that's a process over time. And when they break down, you see how nice and thick this is here?
Right.
And it has a lot of room for the nerve to come out. Those fibers will break down and that'll thin. And the process is shown here, where the disc thin and the response to the thinning and the extra pressure on the spine, more bone material is added, and then finally also almost even fusion together of the bone material.
Wow. So if someone has a herniated disc or disc degeneration, then can you explain why the pain is going to travel down their arm or down their leg?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, when the bulging or herniated disc reaches a certain point, it will impinge upon the nerve root.
Okay.
And that causes a lot of pain. These aren't the actual nerves. There's 300 to 400,000 nerve fibers in any one nerve root. So depending on what fibers are actually affected by that pressure, you're going to feel pain, you might feel tingling, you might feel muscle weakness, a lot of different things depending on the number of fibers that are being impinged upon. So, so that's, if you have it from the neck, those nerves go down through your shoulder and down your arm. If you have it from your lower back, it goes down your leg all the way to your toes. So.
Okay, so this might sound like a silly question, but why can't a person just hang upside down, let's say, to decompress?
Yeah, it's not a silly question, and that's in theory it sounds good.
Right.
But that we consider traction. Your body has some reflexes, homeostatic, proprioceptive, and axonic reflex. Just fancy terms for saying when your nerve system senses a stress to it, it pulls back against it.
Okay.
So if you're just hanging upside down, your muscles with the nerve system involved are going to actually tighten up instead of relax. Now, if you do it for long enough, it'll fatigue those muscles. So if you have large muscles that are recruited and in spasm, they'll fatigue and they'll feel better, but it won't create pressure, a negative pressure or a separation of the vertebrae like decompression does, because the forces never actually get high enough in this space to cause a decompression.
So can you explain the difference for me? What's the difference between traction versus decompression?
Yeah, like I was saying, with traction, that's a steadily applied force to the spinal muscles, and they can arrange the person's body in certain ways to hopefully target the disc areas, and again, in theory, it's good. Hey, you got disc bulging out, let's put some distraction pressure on there. But because of the way the body is a little bit more complex than that, it has its own built-in mechanism to protect that. And it's not until decompression or discovery of how these tissues respond that you could actually get enough force into this area to cause a distraction effect, to cause a lessening of the pressure in an interdiscal space.
Okay, can you show me on the model here how the decompression works to eliminate pain?
Yeah, you imagine very simply, let's take a degenerated and herniated disc here.
All right.
A patient would be on the decompression table, and because of the motor computerized controlled forces, which are cycled in a rhythmic way, that overcomes those reflexes that I talked about. So what happens is the vertebrae actually separate very gently and very safely, and that creates a negative pressure in the disc space, and that causes that material and all the nutrients around that to then be put back in the right position.
Great.
And that takes pressure off the nerves. And what they found is that when you do that, that also stimulates fibroblastic activity. Those are the cells that create new tissue. It stimulates that, so it actually heals the disc. And then with some physical therapy and then targeted kind of specific core strengthening muscle exercises and retraining, you can actually get that to stay and doesn't come back on you again.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Dr. Digles, this is incredible health information you're sharing with us today.
Yeah.
We've got to take a